So after the last video, I got some questions around parallel processing and splitting the signal path and stereo effects. And so I thought I'd spend a few minutes here and run through some of the basics and some of the kind of specific details, at least that I found in doing that on the quad Cortex. I will say, obviously, if we're dealing with stereo, to really hear the differences and some things I'm going to do, you're going to need headphones or monitors or something so you can hear kind of that stereo effect. So to start at real basics, as most of us know, the quad Cortex has 4 different processing lines. Lines 1 and 2 run off a CPU, and lines 3 and 4 do. So all of those, if you wanted to, you could run them all in parallel, right? So you could have 4 lines, all from the same input, going to the same output. I don't know why you would do that. Obviously, there's multiple inputs. You might have multiple instruments coming through the quad Cortex, and so you might want, lines 3 and 4 might run instrument number 2. So I could see that, but running all 4 for one, I don't know that I would do that, but you could. We get rid of that. So if we're running kind of a normal, one instrument rig, let's start. We've got line 1 here. We've just got input 1. We're going to multi-out. Let's go ahead and just get an amp in here. We'll just go with the good old Lone Star. We will, gain a little less than 5, put this up to around 5, give it a little more presence, a little more treble, and bring down the bass a little bit. Oh, a lot better. And then we would add in the cab. We'll just do a 2x12. So here we got a basic amp. All right, so let's put in a stereo effect. And for this demo, I'm going to use a ping pong delay because it's very easy to hear the stereo effect of it. So we're going to turn the sync off. We'll turn the delay time up a little bit so we can hear the effect. And if I do that and I hit a note, you should hear that the delay is ping-ponging back and forth between left and right, because that's a stereo effect. If I take this stereo effect and I move it in front of the amp, you'll hear we've lost our stereo effect because I put the stereo effect in front of mono blocks. And once you do that, you lose the stereo-ness of it. So that's the first thing to understand, that the order you put your blocks in makes a difference in terms of how it processes stereo. So if you're using something like a stereo chorus or stereo delay, if you're going to put it in front of the amp, which sometimes you might want to do, you're going to have to run parallel amps because you're going to have to maintain that stereo signal. The other thing to keep in mind is the multi-outs. 1 and 2 are stereo pair, 3 and 4 are stereo pair. When you're sending to front of house or into Logic, keep in mind that it will be sending a stereo signal out. So, for example, if I did put this delay here and I had stereo ping pong delay going on, and I'm sending the multi out, but I've only got 1 line coming out and going to front of house. Front of house is only getting half of the delay because it's not getting, if say you're sending from the left, it's not getting the right delay at all. So keep that in mind too. So, but let's put our stereo effect in front of the amp. Let's think about ways we can, get back to that stereo effect. So one way, obviously, is to run parallel amps. So the way you would do that is you would long press on the signal path, and we would get our splitter and mixer. So the splitter is the thing that controls where and how the signal path splits, and the mixer is controlling how the signal paths are recombined. So what we do is let's drag our splitter after the delay and the mixer after the cap. So now, basically, we've got a parallel path in parallel to the amp. So the signal would run all the way through delay, then it would split, and then it would come back after the cap. If you ever find that you want to get rid of this, just long press on it, drag them back and then it's gone. So keep that in mind too. But let's go ahead and have our splitter and our mixer. And we're going to go ahead and add parallel amps. So let's take the Lone Star and we'll just copy it. And then we'll give that amp a cabinet. Let's use the same one. And so now we've got a stereo amp. Let's try our stereo effect. We're still not getting the ping pong, and there's a couple of reasons why. So let's go back to our splitter. Let's talk through the settings on the splitter. So there's a type, and I usually always just leave this in balance. So basically with balance, you have one control here, and you can control how much signal is going to what path. You can do an A/B that allows you to have a little more fine-grained control, or A is line 1, B is line 2. Or you can go to crossover where you can use frequency to do the splitting. I've never used this. I've never even considered using it. I'm not sure why you would use it, but if you have an idea of how you would use that, I'd love to hear it. But put it in the comments. I just don't know. So I always just leave it in balance. And frankly, I usually never even touch the balance. The other thing you have here, and this is one of our issues with our stereo effect, is that our stereo settings are normal, which basically means left and right are both being sent to both signal paths. What we want to do is we want to split it so that the left is staying on line 1 and the right is going to line 2. The second thing we need to do is we go to the mixer. This is where it's recombining the signals. There's a pan control on each signal path. A being, again, line 1, B being line 2. Right now, they're both centered. What you need to do is you need to pan those. And then we should have our stereo effect. So you can hear our ping pong is now going back and forth between left and right as it should. So keep that in mind. A couple things here. When you're using stereo effects, number one, how you order them in combination with some of the other blocks, especially the amps and stuff that are mono, make a difference. So for instance, if you're putting a stereo chorus in front of a single amp, you're basically not getting a stereo chorus. So keep that in mind. That's why if you want to use a stereo chorus, usually I'll put the chorus after the cab. I'll usually put a lot of the ambient stuff and modulation after the cab, because then you can run stereo effects, and you might get, and you'll get that stereo spread. The downside of that is, sometimes using like a chorus into the amp front gives you a certain kind of sound. So if you want to do that, you really do need to run this kind of parallel processing and make sure that you're managing your splitter and your mixer in terms of maintaining that stereo image. This ping pong test is a very easy way to make sure you're still keeping stereo. If I was to say to replace that, and we were to go to a chorus, for example, let's go to, we'll use a stereo dream chorus. Let's give a little more depth again, just to get it to stand out a little bit. So if I was, for instance, to go back, the difference on stereo, not stereo on chorus is much more subtle. So here's basically a mono chorus. But if I change it to stereo, you can hear that the difference is much more subtle. It's there, but it's much more difficult to kind of hear specifically. The ping pong is a great way to test it. So keep that in mind too. So the other reason you may want to split signal paths like this. So let's go back. We'll go back and put it into normal mode, and let's change amps, because the other reason you might want to do this is you want to run 2 amps at once. You want to combine the amp sounds together. So let's change this to, we'll just grab a Plexi 100 patch. And maybe we'll send the Plexi through a 4x12. My favorite 4x12 is the E33, that one. we'll tweak this a little bit. We'll just bring down some of the treble, some of the presence, tame some of that top end. All right. So let's hear what that sounds like. And I've still got it on a full stereo spread, left and right. Let's hear what that sounds like. And I've still got it full stereo spread right now. So a couple of things there. One, I typically would not do a full stereo spread if I'm combining amps like this. So typically what I'm going to do, I'll leave it the splitter normal, and then I will usually pan them a little bit, but I'll be much more subtle about it. So maybe 15. Yeah, just to give some stereo spread, but I want the sound of the two amps to combine together a little bit more. The other issue we have here is the Mesa Boogie, Lone Star, and the Plexi have a phase issue together. And I did a video on this a while back. I'll link it here. But there's a couple ways to fix that. One is on your mixer, there's a phase switch. So you can just flip that, and then that fixes the issue here. The other way you can fix that is there is a block. If you go down to the utility, there's a gain block, and the gain block has the same thing. It has a phase inverter. So again, without the phase inverted, with it inverted. You notice here, the utility gain also you can pan. So keep that in mind too. You can use that at some point to pan left and right if you want to. If you're splitting the signal, I was doing this in my Steve Vai ballerina tone because I was splitting the signal and heading straight out. So I was doing something more like I was not mixing it back, I was just sending it out, into the outputs. And then I would use this block to say, okay, I want this to be left. And then I'd have another line that one to be right. The other thing to keep in mind is if you need to get to use lines 3 and 4, usually I do that because I'm running out of CPU in lines 1 and 2. Instead of multi-out, you just send this down to row 3, send that to multi-out, and then I'm routing through there. And if you want, you can split this. If you want, again, if you ever have a path like that you need to get rid of, just go back and drag it back, and it's gone. So let's go back to our ping pong stereo. I want to show something else. So we'll go to our ping pong delay. We'll turn the sync off. We'll turn the time up here. That's a little too much. And we've got our ping pong delay. So let's say we're running scenes and we've got, all right, well, we want to have an amp down here. We're going to use a PD. We're going to turn that off. We're going to give it its own cab. Yeah, we'll give it a 4x12. We'll give it a 4x12. We'll turn that off. And so now this is something common to do if you're using scene. So I might have a scene where I'm using these amps in parallel, and then I switch another scene and I want to switch over to that PV. So one thing to keep in mind is as long as those blocks are off, our delay should function fine. See, we're still delayed. You can hear we're still getting our ping pong. If I were to do something like, let's say I turn the cabinet back on. Now we've lost our ping pong because I've enabled that mono block. So again, as you're building out these presets, really think through, if you want to use stereo effects, the order you put things in, and make sure that you don't have any mono blocks behind the stereo effect, because otherwise you'll lose the stereo capabilities of that delay, chorus, or whatever else you might be running. Let me know if you have any other additional questions in this area. I can definitely do another video. I hope you found this helpful, and thanks for watching.